Early in 2019, a trailer debuted that became the most talked about movie for seeming so controversial. The film was Loqueesha, a comedy written, directed, and starring Jeremy Seville. In the film, Seville plays a bartender who has a way of helping people with their problems. He is encouraged to apply for a radio talk show host position, and gets the job. The catch is that he only got the job by pretending to be a black woman, a ruse that will continue on for comedy. When the trailer was released, many people reacted negatively. Deciding to both take advantage of the hype and make his case, Seville opted to debut the film early on Amazon Prime in May 2019, as opposed to the scheduled October release date. And once many ventured to finally see Loqueesha, it was met with reactions similar to the trailer as being deeply offensive and misguided. So it was a bad movie. But how bad was it? A bad movie standby that many like to jump to is Tommy Wiseau's 2003 film The Room, a film written, directed, and starring Wiseau in a tragic romantic drama that failed to evoke the right emotions. There have been questions if Loqueesha was going to be The Room of the 2010s. The answer to that question is no. This is not on that same level. It's not that the movie isn't bad enough to be in the pantheon of terrible filmmaking. Believe me, it's terrible. But it's bad for reasons that are far different from the likes of The Room. To explain my answer, we first need to address the topic of films being so bad they're good. The Room is a perfect example of fitting this genre. The film tried to be a romantic drama and failed, but found new life as a goofy comedy, which Wiseau plays off as being his plan all along. When a film fails at trying to be serious, it can come off as silly, and a different entertainment value can be reaped from the misfiring material. Instead of tears and terror, we get smirks and laughs. Loqueesha is intended to be a comedy, and when a comedy fails to bring out laughs, what do they have left to offer? Very few films that try to be comedies and fail ever come back around to actually being funny for the so bad it's good categorization. They are at best annoying and at worst so brutally misfiring they're offensive. And Loqueesha's comedic stumblings easily place it in the worst spot of that spectrum. There are a lot of problems with Loqueesha. The acting is terrible, yes, featuring Seville and company acting out cartoonish stereotypes. From the sassy and egotistical black woman to a local drunk who speaks like a wasted Daffy Duck. The technical aspects are also abysmal, the highlights being ADR dialogue that does not match and a literal rendering error message that pops up in the footage. These are all glaring flaws that make the film awful, sure, but Loqueesha has a much bigger problem than improperly rendered video. It's the very core of the film and trying to be a message picture where the film is most rotten. The film begins by establishing Jeremy's character of Joe as a bartender who can help people out with their problems. But we don't really see a genuine sense of problem solving. Or at least not one that isn't laughably played off as acceptable. We're told that Joe is good at dealing with people who have relationship problems, but when he's put to the test with the black woman Rachel strolling into the bar, things go wrong. Or at least they would go wrong if this were reality. After listening to the woman's story about hating the men in her life, Joe proceeds to literally call Rachel a bitch, and then try to make her laugh with a terrible impersonation of Gandhi, a dark shadow of things to come. Not only does Joe succeed in making Rachel feel better about herself and laugh at his terrible jokes, but she will also become the love interest. Because reasons? Joe has a problem. His ex-wife wants to put their son in an expensive school. Joe doesn't have the money, but finds a solution might lie in a recent job posting for a radio talk show host, which he reads off a piece of paper that looks as though it came out of a giant fortune cookie. I don't know why Joe thinks there's a lot of money in radio. Perhaps the screenplay was dated, but he needs this job. He sends in an audition piece and later receives a rejection letter. Joe is crestfallen. What happens next is the signature moment that asserts Joe's racism. While at home, Joe watches a trash-talking TV show of two black women. He then recalls that the job posting strongly recommended applicants that were minorities and women. If the movie had a certain progression, Joe's bad idea of pretending to be a black woman would have some stages. He may think about it for a moment, reject the idea, maybe do some research on popular black entertainers, and go through a whole lot more before finally arriving at the radio personality of Loqueesha. We don't get that. We just jump to him immediately coming up with the name and voice for this new character. Where did the character Loqueesha come from? How did Joe decide on this particular voice with the mannerisms? We don't know exactly, but if the scene of him doing a bad Gandhi impersonation was anything to go by, he has most likely had this racial character locked away inside his brain, just waiting to come out. Perhaps he thought it was too racist for a joke, and that the only way he could get away with such a portrayal was if nobody knew or saw his face. In short, Loqueesha is born immediately out of Joe's racial stereotype playbook, and there's very little in the film to suggest otherwise. Joe submits an audition recording as Loqueesha, and isn't questioned for sounding like a racist stereotype, and handed the job. This brings up some huge flaws in making this type of film take place over a local radio station. To host the show, Joe will have to come into the studio to perform the character of Loqueesha, thus risking being found out. But the film gets around this problem by having Loqueesha demand nobody see her as she enters the studio, and I guess the station just accepts these terms? Because if they didn't, then we wouldn't have a movie? I guess? But why couldn't Loqueesha be a podcast host? It would make more sense for an impersonal perspective where Joe would not have to be present. Whatever, this film has far grander problems than to bother with this nitpick. Assisting Joe in performing this Loqueesha act is his black best friend, who finds nothing wrong with this at all. This may in fact be a rationalization on Seville's part, believing that the acceptance of this type of character from a few of his black friends was confirmation enough to not be considered stereotypical or racist. Funny enough, Seville would do this in real life by referencing how he knew Marlon Wayans on his social media account. Not exactly the best of associates, considering Wayans also has made troubling films over the past few years with tone-deaf racial commentary, especially since the photo in question references the premiere of White Chicks, a film where black guys pretend to be white women. However, Wayans wasn't exactly cool with this social media post by responding on Twitter with, "I hate when people tag me in their bullshit. It's annoying as fuck." Anyway, Joe needs a face for Loqueesha and decides to hire a black woman for the role. He hires Renee, an overly chatty black woman, to play Loqueesha in image only. Renee will just not shut up, where at her audition she launches into a long and meandering talk of praising Loqueesha, including her literally saying that Loqueesha is a positive influence on the African American community. Like a lot of stuff in this film, we're just supposed to accept this, told rather than shown. Loqueesha becomes a hit on the radio. Somehow. But Joe is faced with a problem. It seems as though the character of Loqueesha is coming out of Joe as more of a split personality, where Joe cannot contain the character and separate the persona from himself. Before the film can become some type of psychological horror for Joe's racist caricature overtaking his mind, the film resolves this issue quickly and bizarrely by having Joe speak with Loqueesha on air to resolve his own issues. This is the height of the film's egotism. A scene where Jeremy Seville is playing two characters trying to come to terms with himself and prove that he is right. Believe it or not, the movie does not end here and somehow gets worse. Renee is further developed as a villain because she wants a bigger cut and threatens to tell the truth about Loqueesha. This doesn't really make Joe quake much because his son convinces him he should be himself, especially since Joe doesn't exactly need to keep him in this expensive school now. Joe drops out of the role of Loqueesha and Renee takes the reins on the radio. She is horrible. She gives bad advice, fights with callers, and literally declares herself a god. Joe could walk away from this and let Loqueesha go down in flames, but decides to finally be honest and reveal to the station and the listeners that it was all an act. He leaves his job up to a vote as to whether or not he should continue. Rachel, now realizing that Joe is Loqueesha, confronts him about his sexist and racist caricature, but don't get too excited. Joe explains that he should be judged by what he said and not how he said it. Rachel, of course, swallows this logic, swallows his tongue, and then sleeps with him. The film ends with the people having spoken, and of course, Joe gets his job back and keeps doing the voice of Loqueesha. This ends the film on a very warped note that a white man does a better job at playing a black woman than a black woman. Loqueesha is a deeply misguided film that tries to make a point for, I suppose, expose the plight of how political correctness damages employment chances in preference for candidates based more on race and gender. But it proceeds with the same stumbling and jaw-droppingly terrible strategies as that of the controversial 1980s comedy Soul Man, where a white college student attempted to look and sound black to attain a scholarship. Joe's decision to pursue the radio job as Loqueesha is counterproductive because it takes away from a job that might have gone to a black woman where he literally plays a black woman, quickly sweeping away the whole judge me as me argument that Joe makes constantly to excuse all of his actions. There's an old saying by film critics that a film is not about what it is about, but how it goes about it. Let me try to explain. The action and adventure aspects of Indiana Jones seeking the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark is more entertaining than the actual acquisition of the Ark itself. We like Indy as a character not so much because he pursues dangerous treasures, but how he pursues them. Joe's take on his performance of Loqueesha suggests the opposite, that his intent is more important than the stereotype he portrays. Except that a lot of these down-on-your-luck disguise comedies are entertaining more for the execution than their intent, and it's impossible to see Joe as anything but an offensive caricature because the entire premise of the film and the majority of its intended humor relies on Joe sounding like a black woman. How can we judge Joe's intent when we're constantly getting Loqueesha, even after Joe tells the truth and should logically retire the voice? The only way that any of his terrible decisions fly in this film is because the writer and director has willed it so by explaining away his actions with mere hand waves of the ends justifying the means. And as a result, the film is not so much a commentary on political correctness as it wants to be, as it is a stumbling placation of the politically incorrect. If Seville were to follow the logic of Wiseau to give his film new life as a cult film, he would have to make the ridiculous claim that his film was satire all along, that the film was secretly railing against the arrogant white man and his tone-deaf racism and sexism. But in order to swallow that logic, we would have to accept Joe's many soapbox moments as not meant to be ranty statements on the nature of PC culture, but parody. But it's too late for that now. He has already come out about how he thinks his film is insightful, and if the quotes on the movie's website are anything to go by, some people have already taken his deeply flawed message seriously. Jeremy Seville is no Tommy Wiseau. There will not be midnight screenings of this film where movie geeks will dress up in Loqueesha cosplay to quote along with the film, or have Seville sign their DVD copies. It is far too dim, offensive, ranty, and downright uncomfortable to watch to ever achieve such cult status as The Room. Joel Golby of The Guardian described the film best in his review. Worse than The Room in every way. So no, Loqueesha is not the next Room of the 2010s. That honor belongs to Wish Upon. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to see a particular video essay in the future, consider donating to my Patreon, where I will be taking requests through there. Again, thank you for watching.